everyone, I'm Elliot.
I'm Phineas.
And we are the Peters Bros, and welcome to our spoiler review of Thor Ragnarok.
We did do a spoiler-free review if you have not yet seen the movie, which is linked down below, so you can travel to the handy-dandy description box and click that link instead of watching this video and getting spoiled and then the movie being ruined for you. That being said, let's start spoiling.
Okay. Really, I think the biggest spoiler thing to talk about is, strangely, not the death of Odin, but the fact that Thor lost a flippin' eye!
Nick Fury style! There's a surprising amount of missing eyeballs in the MCU. Throughout all of their movies and TV shows, they have a surprising amount of one-eyed characters, and
now Thor has been added to that roster.
He's joined the club of one-eyed wonders.
And strangely, the moment when he lost his eye wasn't as dramatic a moment as it should have been.
So I think probably the biggest flaw with this film, I'll just go ahead and say, this film was amazing. We loved it.
It was so great.
We do have some things to say though, starting with, I think the biggest flaw was the fact that we talked about in our spoiler-free review how the humor kind of undercut moments that could be more meaningful than they were. Mm-hmm. But they had things like Thor losing an eye from his sister cutting his eye out with a sword, as was Thor's dad, Odin, dying, and both of those moments needed to be bigger and more emotional, especially because they kept going back to Odin's death, having Thor have these like flashbacks.
Yeah, it was him reliving that moment with his father on the hill. You know, and that moment wasn't as big, mostly because that first like opening act of the film was so rushed.
It was rushed.
They just threw that at us so that they could get to Sakaar and get to the fight with the Hulk.
They had a spot they needed to get to be able to actually like start their story that they wanted to tell. I mean, they could have done away with Doctor Strange.
As much as I loved that sequence with Doctor Strange, it was great, but as much as I loved it, I really think it was unnecessary. I think the main reason that segment was in there was because the story team at Marvel was trying to figure out ways to put characters together, you know, so that we feel like all the characters exist in the same universe leading into Infinity War.
But they've already done that so well that they don't need to keep rehashing that they're all in the same world, especially since they have Thor and Hulk buddy cop team-up movie going on.
I think it's just the fact that Doctor Strange has not been seen with any other Marvel character outside of his solo film. So that's why I think it was in there, and it was kind of unnecessary. It was hilarious, and it was wonderful. I loved it, but it was to the detriment of that first act and the necessity of a big emotional scene with Odin and his sons.
If the scene where he dies is more emotional, then when they go back to it and Thor becomes the god of thunder, like truly, and lives up to his name, it would be cooler it would be more than just awesome and epic. It would be what they probably attempted to do and wanted to do.
It would be meaningful and it would be powerful. In that first act, we had so many things thrown at us. First, we had the explanation of what Ragnarok was within the first couple of minutes. We saw Surtur so that he could come back later. Thor defeated him. There was a weird dragon. We were introduced to Scourge, who I think was a very unnecessary character, and introduced to the way the Bifrost worked, and then suddenly the discovery that Loki had been Odin all along, and that then they needed to go find Odin, and that the place where Loki had dropped Odin off was gone, and so they went and saw Doctor Strange. That sequence went on for, I think the perfect amount of time, but then suddenly they were back with Odin, and that scene was, super short. He was acting a little senile. He floated away dust particles. Hela's there. We just learned who Hela was, and it's just
Rainbow Bridge.
It's way too much stuff to pack into that short amount of time.
And then they can start the actual film. Yeah, that was the first maybe 20 minutes, half hour.
Yeah.
I think I'm just guessing from my memory of it, but...
And these are all important things, and these were all great things. I loved what they were doing with it. It just felt so fast, you know? It was a little too much to process.
So it should have been 2 movies. There was never a part in this movie where I felt like it was moving slowly. But after that first segment of a bunch of rushed information, after that it took its time with everything, and it was the perfect amount of time, I'd say, for all of that. Except they could have done away with some of it just so that they could give that first segment more time to develop. They did a great job, show don't tell. They did a great job revealing all the information. It would even be okay just as long as they took time with Odin's death.
How about Korg? He came out of nowhere. He stole every
Yeah.
single scene he was in, and I just think the comedic writing in this movie was really, really great.
It almost feels, I mean, this is not a fact, don't quote me on this, but it almost feels like Jeff Goldblum improvised like all of his lines.
I know, right?
It seems like he just showed up
What
on
was
set
that
and
that just came out of your fingers? Is that
Is that
sparkles?
sparkles? He was just so funny in his role, but it seemed like it was so easy for him to make all those jokes.
Yeah.
And not to say make there be less of Jeff Goldblum in the movie, but
there was a little too much.
they
Jeff
could have given him something more important to actually convey.
Yeah.
Because he was almost like a plot device just to hold Thor there.
There was this whole running gag that they kept bringing back, and the premise of this running gag is Jeff Goldblum talks for a little bit too long, and like
Yeah.
awkwardly.
But it's hilarious, which is
It's
the weird
so
thing. 'cause
funny.
I don't want there
But
to
I
be
think
any
they
less
did
of
it too many times. Like
Yeah.
each joke went on for a perfect amount of time in and of itself, but then the fact that they kept bringing it back was a little too much.
Something
I mean, I laughed every time, so maybe it wasn't too much.
Something that is usually seen as bad writing that I think in this film worked great and was a joke in and of itself was the fact that the Grandmaster had zero character development. He learned no lessons the entire film from the beginning to the after credit scene
Yeah.
where he says the revolution like was a tie, which I didn't actually have any problem
It was
with.
great. That was like the point of his character, and it was like
to
an
just be a
inside joke.
problem. Not to linger on this element of the film, but something else about the humor was that it seemed like it was parodying itself. Like it was parodying the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, out of all the films, you know, The Incredible Hulk didn't get such great reviews, and the first and second Thor, especially Dark World, also didn't get very great reviews. But then Thor and Hulk unite and make the best film out of all of them, and it seems like it parodies the entire Marvel Universe by having all of these like references to itself.
Like
and
the play that fake
Yes.
Odin is watching, where they're reenacting the end of the Dark World
that was
with Matt Damon
that
as
play was literally
Loki
a
for
parody
some reason.
of
Yeah,
the Dark World that they were
Benji
watching in
Holmes.
Ragnarok.
So weird. And one of my favorite moments where it was like very, very, very self-referential turned out to be one of my favorite jokes in the whole movie, and that is the moment when Bruce Banner jumps out of the spaceship, and we all expect him to turn into the Hulk mid-fall so that he can fight Hela's army of undead warriors, which is like, that's a moment straight out of the Incredible Hulk film, which has kind of been erased from MCU canon, where Edward Norton's Bruce Banner jumps out of a helicopter,
Smashes it to the ground, climbs out of the crater as the Hulk, which they obviously seemed like they were going to do here.
but instead we get this awesome and hilarious twist where Bruce Banner just hits the Rainbow Bridge like a dead fish.
I think in that moment,
Bruce
Banner died, and the Hulk came out of his soul and is now his replacement. I'm sad though because they said that he might never turn back into Bruce Banner. I think something that made that joke work so well, the dead fish Mark Ruffalo joke, was probably that would have been a cool moment anyway. If
Yeah.
he came out and was the Hulk, it would have been awesome and we would have loved it.
Kate Blanchett's performance as Hela was really, really great. And the things that I'm disappointed with that have to do with Hela have nothing to do with Kate Blanchett. It's all about the writing and the way that she fit into the story. And the biggest thing that I think was a problem with Hela was her motivation. The motivation isn't what the person wants. That's their objective.
Yeah.
The motivation is why they want it. And I cannot tell you for the life of me why Hela wanted to rule the Nine Realms. That was weak writing. But Kate Blanchett still managed to wow us even with this kind of weak character. The last thing we're going to talk about is the last thing that people saw in theaters, and that is those after credit scenes. We already talked about the Jeff Goldblum one, which doesn't have any impact on the larger plot of the MCU, so we won't go into detail about that. But the mid-credit scene where Thor and the Asgardians come across what appears to be a Kree warship that looms up in front of them. It, design-wise, looked very, very similar to the Kree warship that we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy, that Ronan the Accuser was in command of, so quite possibly this could be the main warship of Thanos' army. My guess is that Thor will have to fight this Kree battleship in order to save his people. They somehow escape, maybe Loki, takes control and gets them out of there, and Thor is left floating alone in space, because when the Guardians come across Thor, he kind of just hits their windshield.
If you liked this review and thought it was helpful, give it a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts on Thor Ragnarok. Was there anything that we didn't talk about that we totally should have? Or anything that you thought was interesting?
Subscribe if you are new or haven't subscribed yet, because it really helps support the channel. Share this video with your friends and family. And don't forget to tell your enemies that we are awesome.